Hi, all. This is Allison White, principal here at Insight Partners. I lead our Customer Success Center of Excellence and have had the pleasure of working with many of you on your customer success strategy over the years. We are thrilled to have Evan from Satrix here with us today to share his point of view on NPS and many tactical tips that you all can use in your NPS programs moving forward. I know that I get lots of questions and have had lots of great debates and conversations across the portfolio with folks who are looking to maybe set up an NPS program for the first time or take your existing program to the next level. And I think Evan will have great insights for you on all of those topics. Before we get started, I will quickly have Christina Nanfelt, who manages our community here at Insight, share a few housekeeping items for today's webinar.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Allison, and everyone for attending the webinar today. As she mentioned, before we get started, I just wanted to make a quick note that we will be sharing the recording of this webinar on our blog by the end of the day. So keep a lookout for an email from Insight Partners. We'll also be reserving time at the end of this presentation for Q&A, but feel free to enter your questions into the side panel throughout the presentation, and then we'll get to them at the end. Also, for Insight portfolio companies who are tuning into today, we do encourage you to share what you've learned with your peers by starting a discussion thread on the Go Network Insight's community platform. But that's it for housekeeping. I'll now pass the mic to Evan. Thanks so much, Evan.
Very good. Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Allison, and welcome everyone to today's webinar. I'm excited to speak with you all about how to drive greater return on investment from your Net Promoter Program. It's great to see that the level of interest in Net Promoter Score is still so strong after more than 15 years since the system was founded. I will admit I'm a bit nervous that the subject matter we took on for today is too robust for the time allotted, but the good news is that everyone on today's webinar or those who listen to the recording have an ongoing invitation to reach out to me directly to dive deeper on any of the content. So please feel free to connect with me if you'd like to do so. So with that, let's dive in here. A few facts about me. I was an early adopter of Net Promoter, first implementing it way back in 2005, only a few years after the research was released. Shortly thereafter, I founded Satrix Solutions. Now, Satrix, the word comes about because of the blending of two words, satisfaction and metrics. So Satrix Solutions, we've been in business for more than 10 years, and we've worked with hundreds of companies to adopt or mature their Net Promoter programs. It's that experience that serves as the foundation for what I will share with you today. Through all of our work, we've identified 4 areas where companies either make mistakes or overlook important elements or otherwise miss the mark with Net Promoter, thereby inhibiting their ability to maximize the impact of the program. So it's those 4 areas that will be the focus of today's conversation. So this first few slides, I suspect, will be a reminder for many of you, so I'll move relatively quickly through the content, but a brief history on Net Promoter. Back in 2003, Fred Reichheld, pictured here, worked with Bain and Satmetrics on the research that forms the basis for Net Promoter. For those of you who want to dig in, this initial article back December 2003, entitled The One Number You Need to Grow, has a lot of information, and certainly the 2 books that followed go into great detail. So The Ultimate Question and The Ultimate Question 2.0, which Fred worked on with Rob Markey over at Bain. So there's a lot of information in the public domain, certainly, but if I could summarize the basis for Net Promoter in one slide, it would be this. What Fred and his colleagues found, not surprisingly, was that promoters or advocates consolidated more of their spend with the companies they favored. In short, advocates spend more than typical customers. So there's clearly value in creating more of them. But their revenue extends even further when you quantify the impact that they can have on a business by referring more or serving as references or buying additional products and services and so on. What Fred and Bain laid out is something that we all intuitively know, but that they were able to quantify, is how much more a loyal customer was worth compared to, say, a simply satisfied customer. So they set out to help business leaders easily identify who their advocates or promoters are, and hence Net Promoter was born. So what Fred and Bain identified is that this one question, the one reflected here, had the highest correlation with the subsequent behaviors exhibited by the survey respondents. They also determined that companies with higher Net Promoter Scores outperform their competitors. So that research detailed in the books that I shared provides a foundation for Net Promoter. And you see the question represented here in the case of Satrix Solutions in our own client surveys. How likely are you to recommend Satrix Solutions to a friend or colleague? The endpoints are labeled with not at all likely over the 0 and extremely likely over the 10. Now, importantly, the color coding and the categories are not listed in an actual online survey. That's just for the edification for people on this webinar. But by posing this question and categorizing responses into promoters, passives, and detractors, you determine your company's Net Promoter Score, which is the percentage of promoters minus the percentage of detractors. So consider if all your companies are detractors, or all your customers are, your company's score would be -100. If all of your customers are promoters, your score would be a +100. Based on all the work we've done, average scores for B2B companies tend to fall in the teens and 20s range, with SaaS companies maybe falling to the low end of that range. And frankly, not unusual to see SaaS companies' scores closer to 0 or even negative. Now, for those of you who have researched Net Promoter Score, have been hearing about it over the last 15 or so years, you may have noticed there's some controversy around it. In fact, there was a prominent article not too long ago in the Wall Street Journal that painted a somewhat negative picture of Net Promoter Score. So by no means is there sort of this universal agreement that Net Promoter Score is really the ultimate question or the one number you need to grow. In fact, it was really just clever marketing by Fred and Bain that helped us to gain prominence, and some early adopters, some very big companies that got a lot of press back in the early to mid 2000s that have helped thousands and thousands of companies adopt Net Promoter. That said, when Net Promoter System is properly executed, it can be immensely valuable for your business, even transformational in a variety of ways. As I mentioned earlier, we've worked with many companies to adopt or refine their programs. So let me tell you why I like it when it's used properly. First of all, loyalty is a higher bar than satisfaction. For someone to feel such a level of engagement or connection with your brand so as to refer your company to others, that certainly makes it that they're higher than satisfaction. They feel more of a level of commitment and loyalty to your organization than just simply being satisfied. Also, Net Promoter has been widely adopted partially because it's intuitive. It's really easy to explain. Sort of the construct, a 0 to 10 scale, promoters, passives, and detractors, pretty easy to convey to your staff and to others. And that makes it also a powerful motivator for employees. They get to understand what it means to have customers in the detractor category or in the promoter category, and what they can do to help move the needle and move more customers into promoter categories. So it really is a great culture builder as well, and we're going to talk about that here in a moment. Net Promoter, the score itself, satisfies metric-oriented executives and board members, so it's commonly used in those capacities. And it also, when used properly, instigates activities that lead to a better customer experience. So that's certainly going to be a big discussion that we're going to have here during today's webinar. Now, on the other side, there have been several criticisms. I noted that Wall Street Journal article, so you see a screenshot of that here. To be sure, some of these criticisms are fair, but frankly, some of them are true with almost any survey. And in the case of Net Promoter, they can really all be overcome, and we'll be touching on how as we move forward. But it can be misused, and oftentimes, unfortunately, it is. It can be a little bit challenging to correlate Net Promoter Score to company growth. Gaming can be prevalent if you're not careful. It's not always so easy to benchmark against your peers because you're never entirely sure how other companies are utilizing or what their methodology is. And I think, one of the biggest criticisms of Net Promoter is that, there's just too much emphasis on the score, this sort of vanity metric, and people get too caught up in the score and overlook the importance and the impact that the overall system has on a business. So as we think about all the goods and maybe, or the good and maybe the not so good related to Net Promoter, we're going to really dig in here about how to drive greater return on investment, and we're going to address some of those criticisms as well. So I talked about those 4 buckets that we created for this webinar, the buckets that we see most of the issues that inhibit a company's ability to maximize ROI. The first one is that all too often Net Promoter isn't properly implemented. I mean, it's supposed to be a simple construct, right? But unfortunately, we see problems all too often, in particular in B2B companies. Let me share a few prominent examples of that. So this visual representation is of Satrix Solutions service portfolio, organized along the employee and the customer journey. If you look to the lower half of the slide, you'll see there are opportunities at numerous touch points to establish listening posts, to solicit valuable feedback. The truth is, Net Promoter is not well suited for all of these feedback programs. Net Promoter is really intended to measure the degree of which a customer has an affinity to a brand, a product, or a service. So generally speaking, a contact, we believe, won't have a basis for recommendation based solely on an experience, for example, with your technical support team or after an onboarding or implementation phase. They just don't have enough knowledge yet to say whether they'd be willing to stake their reputation and recommend you to somebody else. So we tend to advise clients to use Net Promoter primarily for their customer relationship surveys. So you see here, I've highlighted the few touch points that really Net Promoter is well suited for. You'll notice also that we make a distinction between a strict Net Promoter survey and a relationship survey with Net Promoter. Nearly all of our clients, many of which are B2B SaaS companies, embed Net Promoter within a more extensive customer satisfaction survey. That survey may have 7 or 10 or 12 questions and may only take a couple of minutes to complete. But this way, you're not just getting your Net Promoter score, but I'd argue even more valuable than that, the drivers of satisfaction and dissatisfaction. So this is one of those areas that really helps companies adopt Net Promoter in a way that doesn't overemphasize the score and makes the program much more valuable to your organization. As a quick side note, before we move on, Net Promoter Score is also being used more and more on the employee feedback side, which is represented on the top portion of your screen here. And the question, how likely are you to recommend Satrix Solutions as a place to work, is referred to as Employee Net Promoter Score, ENPS. So we'll set that aside for now because that's frankly, it's a whole nother webinar, but it's been interesting to see how Net Promoter has been adopted in the employee feedback realm as well. So using Net Promoter Score at the appropriate time is important. So is inviting the right people to participate. So we see issues with this that are all too common. For B2B companies, we generally recommend going broad and going deep. Invite all active customers who have an informed point of view, including decision makers, influencers, and users. I think we all know that purchase decisions at B2B companies are rarely made by a single individual. And those who are involved in the decision to either engage or renew or churn are often influenced by others in the organization. So let's be sure we know how they all feel so we can have a complete picture into the sentiment of that account. You'll also note at the bottom of the screen, we advise against inviting customers that are too new. If you invite them to a survey before they've had enough experience to fully evaluate your offering, their middle of the road response can artificially depress your Net Promoter Score. So with many of our clients, our methodology includes inviting only companies or contacts who have been with the companies for 90 days or 180 days. That's going to be dependent upon your business, but it's something that I'd keep in mind. There are several other important pitfalls to watch out for, and I've summarized them on this slide. You'll see them here pop up one at a time, but these problems are frankly all too common, and each one of them that I share can actually be a subject of its own webinar, but I wanted to flag them for you to keep them in mind as you push forward. The first pitfall that commonly found is with survey design, and this includes question language, scales, survey flow, appearance. All of these things matter. They matter a lot, in fact. If you're just using the Net Promoter Score, the likely to recommend question, and the open end that follows, your risk here is pretty limited. Although I've often seen mistakes just with the Net Promoter Score. Seems some companies want to use a 1 to 10 scale when it is in fact a 0 to 10 scale. But if you're including more questions in your survey, as we recommend, be sure to do your homework on survey design. And by the way, we have a lot of content about that on our website, so please feel free to visit our site and look at the numerous articles that discuss proper survey design and best practices. Survey population issues relate largely to what I just shared, being sure you're inviting the right people and that your customer database is as up to date as possible. We've all heard the phrase garbage in, garbage out, and this is one of the areas where that's really relevant. Many companies also suffer from low response rates. If you don't have a robust survey response data set with high statistical validity, you won't be able to confidently assess what your customers want, which makes actioning the survey insight nearly impossible. You certainly wouldn't want to make important decisions about your product roadmap, for example, based on feedback from your survey when your response rate was only 5%. So survey response rates are vital, and getting as many people to respond, and that's something we also have a lot of content on our website. In fact, we have an ebook on maximizing survey response rate that offers a lot of insights there. Gaming is another common problem, and it can take many forms, some of them intentional, but many of them are unintentional. I did a presentation a couple of years back and shared the 10 most common forms of gaming, introducing bias by color coding or by asking leading questions or cherry picking contacts or removing responses for unjustifiable reasons happen all too commonly, and they will degrade the quality of your data. We also all know, I think, that begging for scores that happens sometimes at car dealership service centers. I've actually seen versions of that happen in B2B companies as well. So you definitely have to keep an eye out for gaming and do what you can to keep it to a minimum. Biased interpretation is another pitfall, and it comes about when people analyzing your survey data go into it with preconceived notions, or it's kind of like that fox in the henhouse situation. It's really best to find an objective third party to convert the data into findings and recommendations. And finally, one of the biggest pitfalls that increase the risk of not realizing the ROI you expected is simply not acting on the feedback. If your customers take the time to provide input and don't see any experience change or don't feel like you're acting on it, they're going to stop responding to future surveys, but it also could very well harm the relationships you had hoped to strengthen through the program. And unfortunately, a lot of companies venture into whether it's Net Promoter or any kind of voice of customer program and don't do the requisite follow-up or actioning of the insights. And customers can get frustrated quickly when that happens. So I encourage you to keep these pitfalls in mind so you can account for them while you're implementing your Net Promoter program. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult to generate a meaningful return on investment. So now we get to that second bucket where we see companies struggle, and that's what they do with the data. If you've implemented properly, you should have a wealth of quantitative and qualitative feedback from your customers. They've essentially told you what they like, what frustrates them, where you should focus your energy to increase promoters, lessen detractors, and improve your Net Promoter Score. It's really now time to make sense of all of that data. What you want to ultimately produce are findings and recommendations that are trustworthy, that are derived using a strong and consistent methodology that can hold up to scrutiny. And you want those findings to be based on statistically valid data in case the CEO or board asks tough questions. The findings also need to be actionable so customer feedback can be used as an input to guide decision making. With those notions in mind, we turn to the actual calculation of your Net Promoter Score. You recall earlier that I noted it's derived by taking the percentage of responses that fall into the promoter category and subtracting out the percentage of responses that fall into the detractor category. So in B2C companies, it's fairly straightforward. You just count everyone and apply that calculation. However, in B2B companies, the calculation could be more nuanced. So imagine an example where maybe you invite 1,000 contacts to your survey, and 100 of them, those responses were all users from the same account. You can see how that would skew your results to overweight the sentiment of that one customer. So simply counting all responses is often not the right methodology for a B2B company. More often, what we do with our B2B clients is we're averaging all responses from each account and using the average score along with the average scores across other customers as the inputs for the Net Promoter Score calculation. In the waterfall method that you see here on the right, you are actually just using the score of the decision maker or the person who has the greatest decision-making authority among those who responded. So some of these, get a little bit more complicated, but they make sense in a B2B environment as opposed to just simply counting everybody, which really could skew your data in many different ways. So the important thing is no matter which approach you choose, pick up the right methodology for your company and stick to it. As you'll see on the next slide, we also recommend segmenting the data in meaningful ways. So it's not unusual for us to deliver a company level Net Promoter Score, but also calculate NPS for different segments, like an NPS by revenue tier or by geography or by customer tenure, to really get deeper insights. You recall one of the biggest criticisms of Net Promoter I spoke of earlier is that it leads companies to focus too much on the score. This is where this material comes into play. It's important that your analysis bring forth much more than just your Net Promoter Score. If you just deliver that score to leadership or to the board, they're going to be very focused on just that one number. Now, depending on the size of your data set, Net Promoter Score can also be subject to variability, and it can also hide important trends or insights. So digging into the quantitative and qualitative data in a variety of ways can really reveal the most valuable insights for your company. You can see here that there's a number of different things that you can do with the data set, both quantitatively and qualitatively, that help to uncover rich insights beneath the surface, so you're not just focusing on your Net Promoter Score. Now, importantly, I'm not suggesting that you sort of enter that realm of analysis paralysis. Of course, you can overdo it, and you have to have a pretty good, meaningful population size to be able to do some of this segmentation. But most of the important findings from your Net Promoter program can be found beneath the surface and clearly identified through things like statistical analysis or segmentation or sentiment or text analytics. It's also where you can uncover the key drivers of loyalty and dissatisfaction. So now you've implemented your program properly, you've analyzed your data like a pro, and you've revealed valuable insights. It's really essential that you share those insights across your organization and be sure, as we've talked about, to act on it. What we all too often see is that the findings and recommendations, the loyalty drivers, the frustrations, they aren't widely shared. And when they aren't widely shared, they aren't acted upon as broadly as your program won't maximize its ROI potential. Every part of the organization has the opportunity to leverage these insights in some way. In fact, it's these actions taken by different parts and different people within your organization that will be the biggest source of ROI for your company. Whether it's using feedback to refine your customer success interaction model, reprioritize enhancements on your product roadmap, remove friction from your technical support experience, those are the improvements that should lead to a better experience for all your customers. And so conveying the findings in an impactful way to your leadership team and to the different department heads is vital. We generally recommend creating a presentation with compelling visualizations that your team can easily understand, and scheduling time with the leadership team and possibly even one-on-one discussions with various business leaders. Also, make the source data available to them, as we found that some executives really like to dig in and read all of the unstructured feedback as well. It's also good practice to share an executive summary version with the entire company, emphasizing the importance of the customer experience and the role each and every employee plays in maximizing customer loyalty. Now, if you've done any reading on Net Promoter, you've undoubtedly heard the phrase closing the loop or closed loop follow-up. What that means simply is circling back with your customers to explore their survey feedback in more detail. Any survey really should be thought of as the start of a conversation. Your customers simply aren't going to write novels in response to open-ended questions in your survey. They almost always have more to share. Or if they're promoters, you may simply want to explore the possibility of them serving as a reference or offering a testimonial. A big ingredient into the success of your Net Promoter program and your ability to maximize ROI is your company's rigor when it comes to closing the loop. Now, not every company has the resources to follow up with every respondent. So I encourage you to think about it, your follow-up in this order. Generally speaking, you're going to want to follow up with as many detractors as possible and as quickly as possible. Those accounts may be at risk, and we've seen companies save a lot of revenue that would otherwise have been lost by scheduling time with the customer and discussing a plan to address their concerns and improve their experience. Following up with passives is also good practice, as it may not require a heavy lift to move them into the promoter category. They may only have a few areas that frustrate them that can be easily addressed. Following up with promoters is generally around thanking them and mobilizing them in ways that will help your business. Now, the final one here is interesting because it's not done that often, but we believe following up with non-responders, at least high-value non-responders, is good practice. take their pulse and make sure that the account is good standing. They didn't respond to your survey, but they certainly could have something to say that you're going to want to hear. Not all of these, by the way, have to be done in a one-to-one fashion. Some cases, for example, thanking promoters can be done in more of a one-to-many approach. Now, we talked about presenting an executive summary of the survey analysis with the entire company. The value in doing that is to give all employees line of sight into customer sentiment and continually reinforcing the commitment your company has to service excellence. Remember, one of the biggest reasons companies have adopted Net Promoter Score is because it's a relatively simple construct to explain. So use it to rally the troops and repeatedly emphasize the importance of your customer focus. The companies with the best customer experience reputations in the world work hard to develop their customer-centric culture so employees understand the role and the behaviors expected of them. There are several ways to focus on your culture year-round, even when you don't have a survey in the field or specific survey feedback to share with them. But you think about rewards and recognition, storytelling, goal setting, giving employees a voice to make sure that you're incorporating their thoughts into the customer experience as well, and just consistent communication around your customer experience programs and the importance of this insight for your business. You can see there's a link here on the bottom right. We've written a lot about this, so I encourage you to check out that link and some of the other content we have around building your customer-centric culture. And finally, we reach the fourth area where I recommend you focus to maximize the ROI of your Net Promoter Program. So, of course, it's important to do the work to quantify the impact your Net Promoter Program is having. Connecting the dots here isn't always easy because establishing a financial linkage between your customer survey data and the impact on your business, it's really the holy grail of customer experience research. But you can certainly start, and you could start in a couple of ways that are relatively easy to address. First, of course, simply baselining your Net Promoter Score and other customer-oriented metrics and tracking improvement over time. You'd want to look for improving scores overall, but also look for other important indicators like monitoring the sentiment of your customers that you consider ideal, or segmenting and tracking high revenue tier customers. So not just that one score, but maybe looking beneath the surface a little bit and tracking your progress there. You can also look at the percentage of customers that have agreed to serve as a reference. That's a relatively straightforward metric that should increase over time. So is the number or percentage of companies that have contributed to your marketing efforts in some way. Like work with you on a case study or posted a review on G2 or Trust Radius. Many companies also quantify the revenue obtained from existing customers, as of course customers are unlikely to spend more unless they're pleased with what they're getting from you already. So monitoring the number of products and services used by each customer or their overall revenue with the expectation that those both go up as happy customers buy more. The clearest evidence of your ROI or your Net Promoter Program can take more work, though, as you factor in all the variables to decipher what the increase in your Net Promoter Score has ultimately led to lower churn rates and higher sales close rates. So the most sophisticated companies have models for tracking customer lifetime value and look at the delta between the customer lifetime value of a promoter versus a passive versus a detractor. Some of them are also calculating the value of a referral or even the business impact of a negative comment. So there's a lot you can do over time. There's a lot you can aspire to do as your program increases in its sophistication. But certainly quantifying the impact of your program and tracking that over time and sharing that with your organization is going to be important to help move the needle. And that brings me to my final point. Don't be satisfied with the status quo. Every company we work with looks to evolve their program over time. There are some things that we've discussed here today that really and absolutely should be in place at the start of your program, but you don't need to boil the ocean and do it all at once. At least annually, consider a comprehensive evaluation of your program, identifying what works and looking for ways to make the program more valuable. Customer experience programs are long-term endeavors, and you should assess the areas listed here to identify where you can raise your game over time. It's not uncommon for us to maybe modify the survey questionnaire a little bit from survey wave to survey wave. Of course, maintaining as much as you can over time enables you to conduct trend analysis and bring forth important cohorts analysis that are really important apples to apples comparisons. But you are certainly, it is permitted to modify the questions to align with what you need to understand for your business as your business evolves. Also continuing to evaluate how you can further operationalize the Net Promoter Score system, how well you're closing the loop and continuing to move the needle there, getting better at that financial linkage we spoke about, and continuously maturing your customer-centric culture, all areas that you can focus on as you move forward. So in summary, please be sure to do these things to maximize the ROI of your Net Promoter Program. Certainly ask the right questions, invite the right contacts, obtain rich, reliable, representative data by maximizing response rates, identify the drivers of loyalty and frustration by maybe asking a couple of additional questions beyond just Net Promoter, and doing the work of analyzing the data both quantitatively and qualitatively. Close the loop and get better at that over time, because your customers, when they take the time to provide that feedback, they do expect to see or experience some change because of it. Use those customer insights to drive decision making, or at least inform important decisions that you're making for your company, and measure and continuously mature the program as you move forward. So that's our summary. We do have, as I mentioned a couple of times, a lot of content. Wasn't able to dig in really deep on some of these concepts, but check out our blog and related Net Promoter content on our website. Also, I'll mention it again, take advantage of office hours. Happy to talk to you, schedule 30 minutes to dig in deeper on any of these topics. Always happy to talk with like-minded folks who are passionate about the customer experience. And for those of you who are interested in potentially engaging Satrix Solutions, there is a discount afforded to you through the Insight relationship. So with that, I believe we have several minutes left, and we can turn it over to questions.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Evan. This was really insightful. So to everyone who's here, please feel free to enter your questions in the side panel. We do have some that already came in. So the first one, should we allow our customers to respond anonymously to our survey?
So that's a good question. If you refer back to the services that we offer and that along the customer journey, almost all of them really should be attributed. Almost all of these programs, these feedback programs on the customer side, it's important that we know who said what, and that we're able to sort of, again, circle back with those individuals and identify them by demographics and really be able to do that slicing and dicing. So almost every customer survey should be attributed, not anonymous. There may be cases like, for example, on a competitive benchmarking survey where it's not as important to have attribution. And certainly on employee feedback programs, most companies offer anonymity because that provides the employee with a more comfortable space to provide candid feedback. But you really should have attribution on your Net Promoter Program and many other voice of customer endeavors as well.
That's helpful. Thank you. And another question. Is customer effort score a good alternative to measuring NPS?
So it's interesting. So customer effort score, for those who may be familiar, has really gained prominence in the last several years. It's another question that can be tailored a little bit depending on your needs, that ultimately, as the name implies, results in a score that you can track over time, with the theory being that in some cases, customers don't really want to be, they don't need to be overly impressed. You don't need to create delight in every situation. What some customers or contacts may want is actually for you to reduce friction, or to just essentially make their effort as low as possible. So what we are doing with many of our clients is we're using customer effort score in some places and Net Promoter Score in others. And you can actually use them even in the same survey. So I don't see them as interchangeable. For example, customer effort score is very well applied with a support ticket type endeavor. If you conceive of a situation where someone needs technical support, again, you're not going to create a promoter. It's unlikely that that one experience is going to create that promoter relationship. What they really want is they want to quickly have their problem resolved. And so in that regard, customer effort score is a good measurement, is a good indicator that that's what you're doing. You're solving their problem quickly. They don't have to jump through hoops. There's low friction, low effort. So we see customer effort score as applicable in some cases and net promoter score in others, but certainly not as a replacement.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Another question. What are good ways of getting key drivers for satisfied customers and drivers for unsatisfied customers?
So the key driver analysis commonly used is statistical in nature, using correlation and regression to uncover which of the attributes you're measuring has the highest correlation with net promoter score. So when people talk about key drivers, that's most commonly what they're referring to. But frankly, we go a step further than that. Really, all of your data, both quantitative and qualitative, should tell a compelling story and often should be pretty consistent. In other words, the qualitative data, the unstructured feedback, what people share in response to open-ended questions, should support the findings of your quantitative data. And if it doesn't, there might be some interesting dynamics at play there that you want to bring forward. So deciphering drivers is certainly done largely through statistical analysis, but we also think some of those other the research endeavors that I mentioned on an earlier slide, looking at the data both quantitatively and qualitatively in different ways, really help to uncover those key drivers. And frankly, it's those key drivers that are going to be some of the most valuable insights. You know, why you and how you create promoters or how detractors are created, you know, through looking at the satisfaction with those various attributes, those various experiences that your customers are having, is I believe more important and more valuable than net promoter score itself. So that's again why we often recommend that companies go beyond just the 2-question survey, so you can really dig in a little bit further without burdening your survey respondent with, you know, a 30-question survey that takes 5 minutes to complete. You can get a lot, frankly, in only a 60 or 90-second survey.
Well said. Definitely agree. Another question. I've seen platforms that allow NPS to trickle over time instead of just once a question, which I like. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so the sort of drip campaigns, as they're referred to commonly, can be great. You know, as with anything, there's advantages and disadvantages no matter what your approach. Generally speaking, you know, the most common approaches are you draw a line in the sand, you look at all of your customers at that point in time, and then 6 months later, you go back in the field and you invite them to participate in the next survey. Drip campaigns, however, because of software becoming more popular, as long as you're, you know, incorporating logic so as to not invite someone maybe more than twice a year to a relationship net promoter survey, they can be great. You're getting data on an ongoing basis. You're getting a constant stream of feedback. The challenge becomes if your population size isn't large enough, you might not get enough feedback, for example, on a monthly basis. You might only have 20, 30, 50 respondents. And then you have to think about ways that you can conduct a look back analysis, essentially, that you're sort of rolling up data over a number of months to really dig in and analyze and do a lot of that sort of root cause analysis that's going to be necessary to generate the ROI. So in short, drip campaigns and doing it over time can be great, but there are a couple of other considerations that you have to factor in. And so for some reasons like that I mentioned, some companies just prefer to do it cleanly at every 6 months cadence.
Amazing, really insightful. Thank you. And if anyone has a last question or a few more questions, feel free to enter it now. I'll give you 30 seconds. All right, seems like those were the only questions that the attendees had. So thank you everyone for joining the webinar. It was really insightful. Thank you so much, Evan. As I mentioned earlier, we will be sharing the recording of the presentation after this, and we'll be posting the deck to the blog. So keep a lookout for an email. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy your day.